What's up, guys? Raziel here. Endgame. And everything surrounding that concept needs to fucking die.
I am Raziel.
So, the entire concept of endgame, that is going to be the topic of discussion for today's video. More like the topic of today's motherfucking rant, but I digress. If you've kind of noticed, most games, MMOs especially, are defined, whether they are good or bad, dependent on what people feel about their end game. The end game. What is end game? End game is what you do when you hit maximum level, when you are finally able in a lot of ways to play the game. It's a plague that's been on the industry for well over a decade and a half now. And it's not something that always existed. In fact, it didn't first exist until World of Warcraft. And that's no knock on World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft was the first of its kind in terms of, you know, being a theme park MMO where things were more instance-based, where you experience the rides, the different rides when you hit level cap. But even vanilla WoW, that wasn't the case. Endgame wasn't really a concept even in World of Warcraft until Burning Crusade, because Blizzard didn't realize what they had in raiding, with Molten Core, and they didn't really figure out what a draw it was until, Zul'Gurub and getting into Nax 40. But that's not the point. I'm not here to place blame on any one game for starting it, but it's something that has plagued the industry, the MMO industry, now for quite some fucking time. So, end game. It's what you do at the end of the game. And it encompasses what the entire game is. So, what's the problem with endgame, and what are the solutions? Well, first I'm going to go into the major problems that I believe an endgame model does, which is predominantly just very, very a dominant trait in any game that is a theme park based MMO. And I know I've talked about this topic before in my other video of how World of Warcraft changed the MMORPG genre, derailed the MMORPG genre. The link to that video will be in the description. But I want to go into some more detail because I think this is the crux, the main thing that kills or allows an MMO to live these days. And it's not a sustainable model. It's not something that can continue if we want the MMORPG genre to continue and not just fizzle out and disappear and become a thing of memory. So, what's wrong with the endgame model? Well, for starters, it creates a cycle, if you will, a treadmill that the developers have to stay on, that they will ultimately never be able to keep up with, and it creates what I call the trickle effect. What the trickle effect is the developers are then forced to put out trickle content to the player base to keep them engaged, to keep them interested in their game, and there's only so much even developers with shitloads of fucking money and resources and the best developers in the world can put out at a time. And it'll never, ever, ever be put out at the rate that the consumers can consume it, especially the most hardcore players. And something you have to keep in mind is MMOs in their original design, as seen in my series about WoW derailing the MMORPG genre, is that the game can't revolve around such a model because it was originally designed to be for players that were akin to Dungeons and Dragons, to the old board games, to the infinite possibilities. Again, if you want more context, see my previous videos. But this trickle effect, the developers can never catch up. So there's always going to be content droughts. There's always going to be periods of time where there is literally nothing you can do. You've done everything, or the shit that is left over to do is relatively boring or isn't conducive. It's not something you want to spend your time on, so you drift off and go to other games. You cancel your subscription, what have you. and you may or may not come back when the next patch cycle comes around. A lot of people do, but it kind of defeats the whole purpose of an MMO when an MMO was supposed to be in the first place, which is a living, breathing world where there's always something to do. There's always a reason to go there. That's point number one with the end game model that I feel is completely destroying the genre, and it is not sustainable. The second thing is it highlights. It puts a big old fucking piss-colored highlighter on top of everything that is repetitive about their game. Games get repetitive. There's no way around that. Any game, single player, multiplayer, MMO, non-MMO, there's going to be a repetitive nature to it. When you have an endgame model, it highlights the repetitiveness. It puts it in big, bold letters that screams at you, hey, dumbass, you're doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. That's a problem that doesn't need to be there. You're always going to have repetitiveness, but if your world is large and alive and living and breathing, the repetitiveness is reduced. But when you're locked to instances that reset weekly or quests that reset weekly or daily, it creates that repetitiveness that can't go unnoticed. No matter how much you love the game, that starts to eat at you. It starts to get to you that you're doing the same thing over and over. And keep in mind that MMOs in general are not like dungeon crawlers, like games like Path of Exile, Diablo, where, yeah, it's extremely repetitive and you're aware of it, but you don't care because the amount of loot and reward you're getting is consistently large, and as long as you play, you're getting rewarded. That doesn't exist in MMOs. These days, anyway, these theme park MMOs. Now, the third point that I want to get into, theme park MMOs, they always seem to have this end game model. I mean, I can't think of one that's released in the last 15 years that didn't have an end game model. But end game and theme parks in general discourage organic community development. What I mean by what's organic? Organic means it happens naturally. You know, if you're a fucking idiot and you don't know what organic is, that's what it means. It's a natural occurring thing. And community development is how players meet up, become friends, do things together. When you have an open world and you have infinite, well, not infinite, but large numbers of possibilities, and you don't need 100% to have the most reliable team that meets on every reset day, you tend to run into people and become friends with them or enemies with them, and organic relationships are formed in the game when it's an open world sandbox type game that doesn't follow the end game model, while the end game model kind of enforces cliques or, you know, groups of people that absolutely refuse to play with someone other than someone that's in their group. That's something I've found just from observing and playing these types of games over the last 15 years. But I think it doesn't completely remove it, but it absolutely discourages organic community development from my experience. Point 4, it makes major portions of the game irrelevant. This is huge. Look at World of Warcraft. Look at Final Fantasy XIV. And look at, I haven't really played Elder Scrolls Online, but I'm sure it's there too. The open world becomes largely irrelevant, and it focuses on the expansions areas, and your reason to go back to old areas is almost non-existent. The worlds are dead, they're empty, because that's not part of the current content patch cycle. There is no reward there. It's all old stuff. Unless you want to go back and get something that looks cool from a previous expansion, that's the only reason to go there. And I think this is pronounced heavily, far more in World of Warcraft than it is in a game like Final Fantasy XIV. I mean, World of Warcraft, any zone that isn't the current zone is fucking dead. And that's how it's always been since Burning Crusade. It's always been that way. There was no reason to go back and do the other things. There's absolutely no incentive to be a part of that world anymore. It's like every expansion is a new version of the game, and that island is the only, or building or area, the new area is the only place that exists in the game from this point on. And that's something that the end game model strongly encourages to happen. My next point, it forces developers to waste time, money, and effort creating what we like to call patches that are catch-up patches, catch-up mechanics. And World of Warcraft is especially awful at this. I mean, I haven't played Battle for Azeroth, but from what I've heard on the news and seen on YouTube and read on forums, it's the biggest fucking steaming pile of goat shit that has existed in World of Warcraft for a long time, and I'm glad I don't play the game anymore. But I digress, not the issue. But they're already injecting catch-up mechanics 9 weeks into their expansion. That's what I'm saying. Catch-up mechanics, if you have to catch up to do what's current, because what's current is the only thing that matters, that means that everything that's before what's current is no longer relevant. See my previous point that I was just talking about, where portions of the game become irrelevant very quickly, and it completely devalues the effort and work a player that did play the previous content when it was current did to get there, and it demoralizes players. And it wastes time and money having to do all this catch-up shit that trivializes your old content. That it needs to fucking go away. And then my final point of why I think the endgame model just needs to die if we want to have this genre continue to stay alive is every expansion gets more stale and it's more of the same because they have to follow the formula in the next expansion, and developers are absolutely terrified to try something new. They're going to follow the formula that works, and to be honest, it's not working anymore. So you may ask, okay then, well, if these are the big issues, what are the solutions? What can we do? Because I'm not just going to rant and bitch and not give my opinion on what I think the solutions to this problem may be. So what I'm going to do is tell you that the solution already exists. In fact, the solution to endgame was there before endgame existed, and it's what MMOs were before endgame. As I said in my other video series, MMOs need to go back to their fucking roots. They need to abandon all of this shit. Because don't get me wrong, I love Final Fantasy XIV, but I hate the content lulls. I hate a lot of the on-rails stuff that exists in Final Fantasy XIV the same way it exists in every theme park MMO. I still think, and I would honestly say, that the best MMOs in the market right now are Final Fantasy XIV, Elder Scrolls Online, from what people say. I haven't played it myself, and Guild Wars 2, which I have played Guild Wars 2 quite a bit. And I agree. I think World of Warcraft's not even in the conversation anymore because it's so fucking bad. But again, that's just my opinion. But I'm going to go ahead and use what I consider to be one of the best MMOs of all time, Asheron's Call. You can also use a lot of these same examples in the original EverQuest, Ultima Online. Can also be applied because it did all these things as well, but I'm using examples with Asheron's Call. So I'm going to go back through my points that I mentioned of what makes endgame bad and present its solution. So, the first big problem that I mentioned earlier, the Trickle Effect. How did Asheron's Call address this? Well, first and foremost, every month they had a new patch, but the patch wasn't being put there so that people had something to do. They were just continually adding things to the game before people even got to that point. Something else about Asheron's Call, because it was open world, way more open world than World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV. Again, I can't really 100% comment Elder Scrolls Online, but definitely Guild Wars 2. It was so open world that you couldn't explore everything this way in that amount of time. So they were just always adding more things. So, not just bug fixes and skill balance. They were doing all kinds of things with, new zones, new areas, new things to find in those zones and old areas. They were always updating old zones, old areas. Nothing was instance-based. So you went into a dungeon, it could be empty because no one else is in there, or someone else could be in there. And that's how you'd, make friends and do that kind of thing. And I'll get to that in another point. But the Trickle Effect, the developers never had to play catch-up. They were never constantly trying to go, dude, there's nothing to fucking do in our game. We got to put shit out right now, guys. We got to get shit out there right now. No, that never happened. There was always something to do because the world was so open and your character's progression was in your hands. The entire game didn't revolve around getting to the level cap. In fact, no one got to the level cap in Asheron's Call, I think, for 2 years. Because that wasn't the point of the game. The point of the game, end game, as we refer to it today, in that game started at level 1. You were always, trying to get stronger, and level wasn't the only way to do that. Now, point 2, it highlights, you know, the repetitive nature of the end game. Sure, Assurance Call had repetitive things where you would hunt, you know, non-stop, killing monsters to get better loot, to get better armor, to find rare things, to get experience, to level up your skills. And that's the thing, because your levels wasn't just important. You could be max level of the game and your character could still be complete shit if you dumped all your points and all your experience that you gained into skills that didn't jive well together or that weren't useful for what you wanted to do. So the repetitive nature, even though things you were doing were repetitive, you could feel yourself getting stronger if you were doing things correctly, if you were focusing on the skills that you should be focusing on based on what you wanted to accomplish in the game. You were constantly getting more powerful, and your level wasn't like, I have to get there to start playing the game. No, your level was just an indicator of how much you had played, pretty much, how strong you had become. So, you know, the whole repetitive nature, like I said, it's unavoidable. Every game that's long-term, you know, is a service-based game is going to have repetitiveness. There's no way around that. But you didn't notice it so much in Assurance Call. The next point, the organic community development. Assurance Call, man, some of the best memories I've ever had of playing games was the friends and enemies that I made during my time on Assurance Call. You know, player killing, running through quests and missions, and searching you know, lands that were very, 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 very dangerous to be in. Things like that. It forced that because you had to go out into the world. The world didn't become irrelevant. You had to go out in the world and explore to get stronger. And, you know, odds were you were going to run into other players while doing it whose mission and goal was to do the same. So you'd align yourself, or when you know, and make allies and be friends, or you would be, you know, out PvPing and some guy would show up and, you know, push your shit in, and then you would spend the whole night hunting that son of a bitch down with your friends and trying to kill him over and over again. Organic community development, that shit doesn't exist in the end game, you know, theme park based MMOs anymore. The next point, it makes major portions of the game irrelevant. Now this is important. Right from day one, there were super dangerous areas to go to in Assurance Call, and, you know, areas that were a little more safe. That didn't change even after the expansion came out. The old world, you know, the non-expansion areas didn't become irrelevant. In fact, they were just as relevant because those areas were still dangerous. The monsters became stronger. You had to go there, and that was the best place to hunt for gear. And I think that's another big problem with the end game. The end game focuses so hard on the gear treadmill. You know, you have to get gear. You have to, that's the whole point of the end game. Get gear, but then the gear becomes irrelevant. Get new gear in the next patch. That didn't exist in Assurance Call because the best gear in the game wouldn't make you invincible, but there were some items out there that would make you a god in certain PvE or PvP stances if you got them. But those pieces were, you had to grind your ass out to hunt down these rare monsters that would drop this rare item and either craft it, and in order to craft it you had to find someone or yourself have a very high crafting skill to have a chance to make the item, or you'd have to do a really hard quest, a really hard dungeon, and get your friends and go through it to get this item at the end. So that was really unique, and a lot of these items, sometimes they weren't, you know, uber powerful, but they were status symbols. They were incredibly fucking awesome that you had this item. A good example in Assurance Call was the Greater Shadow Armor. Very, very sought after armor. In fact, selling those suits of armors on eBay was how I made it through my first semester of college. But I digress. The game never became irrelevant. Old portions never became completely 100% irrelevant. If you joined the game 2 years after release, you had to go through the same journey as someone who played it since launch day, and you'd get the same experience. Sure, there'd be some more powerful players out there that could help you and could teach you things, which, you know, didn't exist in the opening days of release, but you had to go through the same experience. There was, you know, there was no catch-up mechanics, which, you know, is the next point. There were no patches that, you know, said, hey, you can skip all the shit that all these other players had to grueling go through. You couldn't skip that. You could help and get through it a little faster maybe if you made some friends, but you couldn't just, there wasn't a patch that came out and said, hey, all that shit is irrelevant and we devalue everything everyone who actually did that content actually did. Now new players can just skip it. Fuck it. You don't need to do it. You know, things like level boosts, bullshit like that didn't exist because the end of the game wasn't at the level cap. I mean, even when you hit the level cap, that wasn't the end of the game. You had so much shit still to do, and you could still get stronger, even though your level didn't increase until they increased the level cap later. But you could still gain experience and increase your skills even at level cap. So level cap, the level was a status symbol. It wasn't, you know, where you started to actually enjoy the game and have things to do to make yourself stronger. So again, no catch-up mechanics there. The world was completely open. You could, like I said, one player who started 2 years after release had the same experience leveling up and getting through content as the player who'd been there for 2 years. So, the expansions that came out for Assurance Call, and I was only there through the first expansion, trying to remember, Dark Majesty was the first expansion. And it added a whole new, huge continent. Other patches before it added some big continents, but this expansion added a new continent, you know, some new skills, some new enemies, shit like that. But the old world was still just as relevant. Why? Because there's some areas in the new zone where, hey, having that greater shadow armor from, you know, the original game, or having this or that from the original game was not necessary, but it would completely put you in an advantage. So you go back and do that old content and get those things. The world lived and breathed. These additions didn't make the old shit irrelevant. It just enhanced the old shit and gave you even more areas to explore and things to do. But not everyone in the game was on the new island and only on the new island, and no one was anywhere else. That didn't exist. So, as you can see, as I've gone through these points, endgame is not a sustainable model anymore. Final Fantasy XIV gets moments where it gets stale. As we can see, World of Warcraft, extremely stale. All these games focus so much on a gear treadmill, quickly making old content irrelevant, quickly making the old world and the old zones dead, and forgetting they even existed in the first place. I mean, if you've never played World of Warcraft before and you bought it today, and you know you got your free level boost, and you start playing Battle for Azeroth, and you got start at 110, and you only experienced 10 levels of the game. All the other shit is gone, and there's no reason for you to ever do it. That whole 14 years worth of content is fucking irrelevant unless you want transmog. That's not an MMO, man. And you know, and Final Fantasy XIV has got similar problems. Where Final Fantasy XIV, Final Fantasy XIV forces you through the story. You have no way around it unless you pay extra money and skip. But then you're lost in the story, so most people don't do it unless it's their second character or second account or something. But yeah, they still have to experience the story just as the players did from day one. But the content's harder to do, harder to get through because not as many people are doing it. Theme park MMOs with an endgame model cannot survive. I mean, they're going to go the way of the dodo, and unless these companies and these developers adopt the old school way of thinking and then enhance that, build on that, if they keep trying to build on this theme park endgame model, the genre is going to die. It's just going to flat out fucking die. So, guys, that's my rant and my observation. So I'm curious, what do you guys think? Do you think the endgame model can continue to survive? Do you think it's shit like I do? Do you think that major change needs to happen, and hopefully some of the MMOs coming out in the near future might try to adopt some of these ideas? Because I think we all know that this current model is not sustainable. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you're just going to troll, fine, whatever, I don't care. Go fuck yourself with a cactus. But other than that, guys, I will be back with more content really soon. I'm still hammering my way through the current content in the Final Fantasy XIV that I missed. I'm also playing other games. I'm playing a little bit of Destiny 2 because Forsaken is actually good. And I'm always having my eye out for the next big thing, next really good MMO to catch my interest. But what do you guys think? What's your opinion on the current state of MMOs and the theme park kind of end game model? Do you share mine? Do you disagree? Comments down below. Anyway, guys, this has been Razio. I will be back with more fucking content really soon, and as always, keep it real.